There was a young man, or rather a man, who was known in his neighborhood or city as someone who was always involved in fights, drug dealing, or theft, constantly in and out of prison. These men, whom I refer to as frequent inmates, have a hard time getting married. Why? While they might get married, they often end up with women just like them, other criminals or troubled individuals. However, it's nearly impossible for them to marry a virtuous girl from a respectable family, whether rich or poor. Families refuse to give their daughters to such a man, even if it means their daughters remain unmarried rather than marrying a criminal. However, some families with such troubled young men in the house try to marry them off by looking for brides in rural areas. In these rural villages, people often don't know the full background of the groom, and so the families present the young man as someone hardworking and successful, hiding his true nature. Once married, the man shows his true self. He begins to mistreat his wife, often coming home drunk late at night, shouting at her for small things, such as moving his shoes or clothes. The wife, now trapped in a nightmare, realizes the reality of her situation. But in those rural areas, once a woman is married, it's nearly impossible for her to return home. The community sees divorce as shameful, and the woman remains stuck with her abusive husband, fearing for her safety and enduring constant torment. One day, the man commits a serious crime, something too shameful even to speak of, and is sentenced to life in prison. His wife, pregnant at the time, is left alone, struggling to survive. The man goes to prison and she is left with nothing but her pregnancy. Despite everything, she keeps the child and eventually gives birth to a boy. She works various jobs to provide for him, even taking him with her to work at bakeries and other odd jobs. However, she couldn't even register her son officially because she didn't have the proper documents. The boy grows up without an official identity and without education. He spends his childhood moving from one place to another, sometimes staying in rural areas, and sometimes in the city with his mother. Despite her hard work, the boy falls into the same lifestyle as his father, crime and trouble. At the age of 22, he is arrested for violent theft, joining a criminal gang. He is sentenced to several years in prison, following in his father's footsteps. While in prison, he becomes vulnerable to abuse from other inmates. An older inmate, who had been in prison for a long time, begins to exploit and abuse him. The young man, broken and unable to defend himself, is subjected to violence and manipulation. Eventually, the young man confides in his mother, telling her the horrors of what he's experiencing in prison. She decides to take action and files a complaint, naming the abusive inmates, including an older man who had been acting as a leader in the prison. It is then revealed that this older inmate is, in fact, her ex-husband, the young man's father. Both the father and the son had been imprisoned in the same place without knowing each other. The father had no idea that the young man he was abusing was his own son. The mother, overwhelmed by this discovery, collapses from shock. The father, upon realizing what he has done, refuses to eat or take care of himself. He spends the next few weeks in a deep depression, and eventually he too takes his own life in prison. In the end, both father and son die tragically, victims of their own choices and circumstances. The story serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of crime and how it can destroy lives across generations.